I was desperate to find a place that week. A last-minute work interview came up in a city I didn't know, and the friend I planned to stay with bailed 2 days before. Hotels were either fully booked or insanely expensive, so I turned to Airbnb. There was this one listing, nothing fancy, just a basic private room in someone's house, but it was cheap, had decent reviews, and was available the exact nights I needed. The listing showed a bright little bedroom with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto a garden. Reviews were short but positive. Clean, quiet, nice host, and one even mentioned how close it was to the bus line. The host's name was Greg. His profile was blank except for a photo of a dog and a short bio. Enjoys gardening, quiet lifestyle. I booked it. Within an hour, Greg messaged me back, very polite, very prompt. He confirmed the check-in time and added a small note. By the way, the room in the listing isn't available anymore. I've moved guests to a different room recently. Hope that's okay. It felt off, but I was tired, on a deadline, and the price was low. I replied, as long as it's clean and has a bed, I'm good. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and nothing more. Greg's house was about 15 minutes outside the city, in a quiet neighborhood where the sidewalks had cracks and the houses sat a little too far apart. It was the kind of area that felt safe during the day and oddly hollow at night. When I pulled up, I double-checked the address. No number on the mailbox, but the house matched the photos. He opened the door before I even knocked. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Quiet eyes, kind of pale. He had on a gray hoodie and jeans, and he smiled like someone who didn't do it often. "Hey," he said. "You made it." He held the door open wider. "Come on in, I'll show you your room." Inside, the house had that slightly damp smell, like it had been closed up for too long. Not dirty, just unlived. Greg walked ahead, his socks barely making a sound on the wood floor. He led me down a hallway that curved left, past 2 closed doors, before stopping at the last one. He opened it and stepped aside. "Here you go," he said. It wasn't the room from the listing. This one was smaller with no window. The bed looked fine, but there was no desk, no decorations, and the only light came from a dim ceiling fixture with a yellow hue. The walls were bare except for a vent near the floor, and a small framed photo of a sailboat. "Let me know if you need anything," he said. Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him, quietly, but all the way. I set my bag down on the bed, which creaked more than I expected. The mattress was stiff and made a slight crunch when I sat on it, like the plastic cover underneath had never been taken off. The whole room felt like it had been put together in a hurry, functional but not lived in. No personal touches, no books, not even a clock. Just 4 walls and the kind of silence that felt too deliberate. I tried to get some work done on my laptop, but there was no Wi-Fi network in range. I walked back into the hallway to ask Greg about it, but the hallway was dark now. The living room light was still on, but there was no sound, no TV, no movement, just the faint hum of something mechanical, maybe the fridge. I knocked lightly on one of the doors on the way back. Nothing. When I tapped on his door and asked, "Hey Greg, Wi-Fi password?" There was no reply. Back in my room, I noticed something I hadn't earlier. The lock on the inside of the door was broken. The latch had been removed, leaving just a small hole where it used to be. It wasn't even patched up. I tried the doorknob, at least it turned freely from my side, but I found myself hesitating before letting it close again. I left it slightly ajar, just in case. That night I didn't sleep well. Every small sound in the house felt amplified. A faint creak, a soft bump. Once I could have sworn I heard someone clear their throat, low and close, like it was just outside the door. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to the soft click of the door easing open. My heart jerked in my chest. I had left it slightly open, yeah, but now it was open wider, just enough for someone to be standing in the hall and looking in. I sat up fast. "Greg?" I called out. No response. I got up, walked to the doorway, and looked out. The hallway was empty. The lights were still off, and the house felt even more silent than before. I stood there for a moment, half expecting to hear footsteps or a door creak shut, but there was nothing. I went to the kitchen for water, found it clean but eerily sterile. No dishes, no magnets on the fridge, not even a sponge by the sink, like no one ever actually used it. Back in the room, I closed the door fully this time and shoved my duffel bag in front of it. Not because I thought it would stop anyone, but because it made me feel better. I sat on the bed scrolling through old messages on my phone just to distract myself when I noticed something. Greg had never updated the listing photos. The room I was in didn't exist in the profile at all. I checked the reviews again. All the reviews that mentioned the room were at least 6 months old. The newest reviews were vague, short. None referenced the room specifically, just general comments about Greg being nice or the place being quiet. Too quiet. The next morning I woke up to an odd sensation, like I hadn't really slept, just hovered somewhere near consciousness all night. The light fixture flickered once when I turned it on, then stayed dim and warm. My phone said it was 7:42 a.m., but the room had no window to confirm it. That bothered me more than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I relied on natural light to feel normal. I stepped out into the hallway and saw that one of the closed doors I'd passed the night before was now cracked open. Just an inch or two, but enough to see that it was dark inside. I paused, listening. Nothing. I couldn't tell if it had been opened by someone or if it had simply never latched properly. But something about the sliver of darkness through that opening made my skin crawl. Greg was in the kitchen when I turned the corner. He had the fridge open, looking inside like he wasn't really seeing anything. When he noticed me, he jumped slightly. "Morning," he said. "Sleep okay?" His voice was strained, and his hand trembled slightly when he closed the fridge. "Yeah," I said. "By the way, what happened to the original room, the one in the listing?" I asked as casually as I could. He didn't answer right away. He was pouring himself coffee, and for a moment I wasn't sure if he had heard me. Then he said, "Oh, that one's being repainted." He didn't look at me when he said it. I nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. The answer felt rehearsed, just enough detail to sound plausible, not enough to feel real. I poured myself a cup of coffee too, more for something to do than anything else. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, the kind where you're aware of your own breathing. "I'll be gone most of the day," Greg said suddenly. "Got some errands to run." His voice was flatter now, less polite. "Feel free to come and go, just make sure the front door's locked when you leave." Then he turned and walked down the hall, grabbing a small black backpack on his way out the door. I listened to the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway and disappearing down the street. I stood in the kitchen for a while, unsure what to do. I didn't have to be anywhere until the afternoon, so I decided to explore a bit. Part of me just wanted to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was reading too much into a weird Airbnb situation. But another part of me wanted to see what the hell was actually going on. I opened the door that had been cracked. It creaked loudly, and inside it was darker than I expected. The room was completely empty. No bed, no furniture, just bare wood floors and 4 walls that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The strange part? The faint outline of where a bed used to be was still visible in the dust. I stepped inside. The air was cooler in that room, somehow heavier. There were faint scuff marks on the floor near the far wall, like something had been dragged. Maybe a bed frame, maybe something else. In the corner, almost hidden behind the door, I noticed a small hole in the drywall, just a little bigger than a coin. At first glance, I thought it was nothing. But when I crouched down, I realized it was intentional. Clean edges, drilled. It faced directly into the hallway. Not into another room, not into a vent, just straight out into the hallway where people walk by. Where I had walked by. A hole at about waist height. I reached up and flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. No bulb, just the old ceramic fixture with exposed wiring. Whoever used this room last didn't want light in it. I backed out slowly, shutting the door as if not to disturb whatever tension had settled in that space. My mind kept circling the same thought. Why was that room empty? And why had Greg claimed the other one was being painted instead? It was becoming clear that the listing hadn't been updated in months, maybe longer. Back in my own room, I scanned the walls again. That vent near the floor caught my eye. I knelt down and peered through the slats. I expected ductwork or a crawl space. Instead, I saw nothing. Just blackness. But the cold air coming through wasn't from any HVAC system. It smelled faintly of earth, like damp soil. I pressed my ear against the vent, holding my breath. At first, there was only silence. Then a faint, irregular sound, almost like movement. Shuffling? I couldn't be sure. It was too soft, too inconsistent. But it wasn't air. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like something, or someone, was down there and trying to stay quiet. I pulled back fast, heart thudding in my chest. I suddenly felt exposed, like I wasn't alone in that room, even with the door shut. I moved the duffel bag back in front of it and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to piece it together. The fake room, the drilled hole, the vent leading to who knows where. Greg didn't just forget to update a listing, he deliberately left things the way they were. Around noon, I grabbed my things and left for the interview. I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole walk to the bus stop. I was suddenly hyper-aware of details. The shape of cars, faces of people passing, every shadow that moved. The interview went fine, but I barely remember it. I was already dreading going back. When I returned, the house looked the same from the outside. Still quiet, still low-key. But Greg's car wasn't in the driveway. I stepped inside and immediately noticed something wrong. My bag had been moved. It wasn't blocking the door anymore. It was sitting at the foot of the bed. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the bag. I hadn't left it there. I hadn't even touched it before leaving. And nothing else looked out of place. Just that one detail, subtle and specific. Someone had been inside my room. And not just inside, they'd been careful about it. Deliberate, like they didn't want to be noticed, just observed. I walked over and unzipped the duffel bag. My clothes were still inside, but the smaller inside pocket, where I kept my charger and earbuds, was unzipped. I never left it like that. My earbuds were missing. The charger was still there. I checked my phone and found it had 78% battery. Someone had charged it. There was no note, no mess, no sign of forced entry. It was the kind of violation that left no fingerprints, but took something worse. I sat on the bed and felt something small under me. I reached behind the pillow and pulled out my earbuds, neatly coiled, placed there, not dropped. That night I didn't sleep. I left the light on and sat with my back to the wall, phone in hand, waiting to hear the front door, or footsteps, or anything. But Greg never came back. Not that night, not the next morning. By noon the next day I still hadn't heard from him. His car never returned. I knocked on his bedroom door. Nothing. Tried calling the number from the Airbnb messages. Straight to voicemail. I checked the kitchen. No new dishes, no signs of life. The house felt paused, like someone had just stepped out and never pressed play again. I seriously considered leaving, but part of me wanted answers. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. Not really. Not the address. Not the host's name. I didn't like the idea of just disappearing from it like the whole thing never happened. So I decided to look again, not through drawers or private things, just enough to make sense of what was going on. I started with the hallway. The empty room still looked the same. But at the end of the hall, there was a linen closet I hadn't opened before. When I tugged it open, it smelled like dust and cedar. Just towels and sheets. But behind the stack of folded blankets, there was a small cardboard box tucked into the corner. Inside were old key cards, hotel style, but unmarked, and several small envelopes. Each envelope had a name written in cursive with dates underneath. The most recent envelope had no name, just the month and year. This month, inside were polaroids, blurry close-up shots of me, sitting on the bed, sleeping. One of them was from the same night I'd blocked the door with my bag. I dropped the envelope. My hands were shaking. I stared down at the polaroids scattered across the hallway floor, trying to convince myself they were fake, or from another time, or someone else entirely, but they weren't. One of them showed me in the shirt I had worn yesterday. Another was from that first night, my face lit faintly by the yellow ceiling light. I gathered them up and shoved them back into the envelope, forcing it into my backpack. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but something stopped me. Not fear exactly, more like the certainty that if I walked away now, I'd never understand what I'd walked into. I wanted to see what else he had hidden. Not out of bravery, out of dread. I checked the rest of the house carefully. The living room was spotless. His bedroom door was still locked. I considered trying to force it, but then I remembered the door to the basement. I had assumed it was a pantry or laundry room. It was next to the kitchen, and until then it hadn't crossed my mind that the house might have a basement at all. The doorknob turned easily. No lock. The stairs creaked as I made my way down slowly, the smell changing with each step, earthy, musty, faintly metallic. The kind of smell that settles deep in your clothes. At the bottom, a single bulb on a pull chain lit the room, and in that dim yellow glow, I saw it. A mattress, thin, stained, was laid out on the concrete floor, no frame. Next to it, a small metal chair faced an old CRT monitor connected to a cheap security camera system. The monitor was off, but the red power light blinked steadily. Nearby, a folding table held a notebook, some pens, and a row of labeled USB sticks. No dust, no cobwebs. Someone had been down there recently, maybe that morning. I stepped closer to the monitor and found a switch on the side. When I flipped it on, static filled the screen for a second before snapping into a familiar angle. My room, a live feed. I could see the bed, the door, the vent. There was no audio, just the faint hum of the system itself. My skin crawled. I turned it off. I backed away, noticing for the first time that the far corner of the basement wasn't finished, just a dirt patch with uneven walls. A shovel leaned against one side. There were impressions in the soil, like someone had been digging then stopped. Next to it sat a plastic bin, the lid loosely covering its contents. I lifted the corner just enough to see fabric, clothes, folded. Some of them didn't look like men's. I didn't check further. I was past the point of curiosity. This was wrong. This was deeply wrong. I was never meant to be in that room. I was never meant to see any of this. I left the basement slowly, careful not to touch anything else. Back in the kitchen, I took one last look around. The house was dead silent, but now that silence had weight to it. Like the walls had seen too much and were tired of holding it in. I zipped up my backpack, tucked the envelope of photos deeper inside, and headed for the front door. It was locked. Deadbolt and knob. I hadn't locked it. I stood there, hands still on the handle, heart starting to race. I unlocked the knob, then the deadbolt, and opened it to find Greg's car parked back in the driveway, engine still ticking. I hadn't even heard it pull up. I didn't wait. I stepped out, pulled the door closed behind me, and walked down the steps like nothing was wrong. I could see him through the windshield, sitting there watching, not getting out, not moving, just sitting with one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on the gear shift. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. I turned right and walked up the street, not fast enough to look panicked, but not slow enough to be casual. My hands were shaking, my chest was tight. I didn't look back until I was 2 blocks away. The car was still there, still parked, still watching. I stopped at a gas station and sat on the curb behind it, phone in hand, trying to decide what to do. I could go to the police, sure, but what exactly would I say? That I stayed in a weird Airbnb and found photos of myself sleeping? That the host had a basement with a live feed into the guest room? It sounded insane. I knew what I'd seen, but proving it would be something else entirely. Still, I couldn't just let it go. I reported the listing through the Airbnb app first, flagged it for safety concerns, and wrote a vague but serious message. Then I called their support line, asked to speak to someone directly. I told them what I found, carefully, without emotion. The woman on the other end went quiet for a long moment, then said she'd escalate it. That was it. No timeline, no promises. I checked into a cheap hotel that night using cash. No ID, no reservation. I didn't tell anyone where I was, didn't post, didn't text. I locked the door, pulled the shades, and kept the TV on with no volume. Sleep came in fragments. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every hallway footstep tightened my grip on the hotel room key. 2 days later, I got a call from a restricted number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, there was no voice, just faint background noise, like breathing. Then, a soft male whisper, "You weren't supposed to go down there." I stared at my phone, frozen. My first instinct was to smash it, but instead I powered it off. I knew it wouldn't stop anything. Not really. If he had my number, he might have more. My name. My face. Where I worked. Maybe even how I got there. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. He hadn't updated the listing because he didn't want records. He didn't want a trail. And based on what I saw in that basement, he'd done this before. The envelopes, the clothes, the camera. He didn't just rent that room out. He watched it, studied it, collected from it. I never went back. Not to the house, not to the city. I quit the job before it even started, packed up and left. Changed my number, bought a new phone. I told myself I'd report it again, maybe anonymously, maybe with the photos. But every time I pulled them out, I couldn't do it. It felt like inviting him back in, like opening a door that I'd barely closed behind me. Sometimes I check the listing, not with my real account, just browsing. But it's gone now. Pulled from the site. Deleted completely. No trace of Greg. No profile. No reviews. No address. Nothing. As if it never existed, but I know what I saw. And I still have the envelope. You're still here? Then you already know. The real stuff is always scarier than fiction. Subscribe now. I've got more stories like this. True feeling. Unresolved. The kind that crawl under your skin and stay there. Don't miss the next one.